Today I have a very special guest, Nader Dabit. He's a developer relations at Edge and the Node. He's an ex-AWS employee, an author, a software developer, a speaker, a YouTuber, you name it. This man does it all. However, he has a very interesting story. At 17, he was a high school dropout. Then at 19, he was a college dropout. He started coding at 29, when most of the people would say that it's too late. However, he proved that he can be successful. At 39, he joined Fang, and now he's totally into Web3. Nader, welcome to the channel. I'm very happy to have you. Please tell us a bit about yourself and how you transitioned from Web2 to Web3.
Yeah, thank you for the intro. I kind of fell into this space mainly because I became extremely interested in it after researching a few of the protocols that are kind of run by a lot of the tokens that in the past I thought were mainly for speculation only. I didn't understand like why some of these tokens existed other than that people were trading them. But after kind of diving into some talks and some research and things like that, that I kind of ran upon at the end of 2020, early 2021, I became really fascinated by this idea of the decentralized web, Web3, and started really trying to figure out how I could actually move and transition my career into the space. I was a manager at Amazon Web Services, running the developer relations team for the web and mobile team there. And I had also been interviewing at a few other like large corporations that were more traditional companies. I had a lot of great opportunities there, but I decided to kind of leave to go to this startup called Edge and Node that had only been around for a couple of months. It was a brand new, I would say a brand new group of people that had formed this new company, but this team had also been successful in the past in Web3, building out the Graph protocol, which is something I also work closely with. So the team was experienced, but the actual company was new. So I kind of had confidence that I'm with a really great group of people. They gave me a shot, and I kind of just, said YOLO and like left my very comfortable job to kind of go into a space that I had no experience in. And so far, it's been a really great experience. And I'm glad I've done it.
Down the rabbit hole and so successful so far. Still about the same topic, I know you started as a developer in Web3 quite recently, about in April 2021. However, your tutorials, your videos have seen like more than 1.5 million views, and you have helped like thousands of people to navigate this space. What do you think that allowed you this exponential growth in the space?
I think a couple of reasons. I was at the right place at the right time. There was, I kind of came into the space at the very beginning of this big overall awareness that we've had over the last 8 months. So kind of like 6 months ago, we really started seeing people becoming interested in the space, and I happened to have come in a few months before that. So I think I was starting to transition at a time when this stuff was already becoming popular. There wasn't a ton of great educational material out there. So I kind of have been creating educational material, teaching and stuff like that for like 7 years. So I have a lot of experience doing that. So I kind of applied, I guess, everything that I had learned up until that point and built out, to me, the first like end-to-end tutorial that I would have liked to have had. I also had a pretty large platform at that point, like 40 or 50,000 followers on social media. So I think combining all, like being at the right place at the right time, I had a pretty decent following, and I have experience writing, and I kind of created something that to me at the time didn't exist. And I think all those things played into together just for me to kind of have that first piece of successful content, which then led me to kind of get more and more people from the community to kind of start following me. And then, from there on, it becomes a little easier to kind of get eyeballs on the things that I create. And I think that this also shines a light though on what I don't think is very fair in this space, is that like, if you're a creator, you can be creating some of the most interesting stuff in the world, but if you don't have like the platform to kind of get it out there, you're often not going to be able to get as many people to read it and to kind of acknowledge it. So I think like one of the things I've tried to focus on really with within the last 4 months or so with the DAO that I created called Developer DAO is trying to kind of find community members, people in the community that are doing the same educational material open source and kind of platforming them using my audience and then maybe using the audience of Developer DAO to kind of like showcase the work that those people are doing and kind of like lift people that are trying to get their foot in the door, maybe help them get their foot in the door.
We're gonna go to the DAOs shortly, that's for sure. But before going to that subject, I would like to ask you one more question still related to this. So what are you currently working on or you plan working in the future that you're particularly enthusiastic about?
So right now, the projects that I'm really interested in are the different protocols that kind of make up the Web3 stack. I think that understanding and being able to kind of conceptualize what these pieces mean for developers coming into the space that have not really built yet with these tools, trying to kind of clarify that is really important because people want to build stuff. They want to kind of see the idea in their head and then be able to write the code to make it happen. And I think that because this space is so nascent and new that we don't really have the answers to all those questions clearly defined yet, but we're kind of getting there. So I think that one thing I'm really interested in the next year is kind of helping developers be able to kind of think of these ideas and build them using these new decentralized technologies and creating educational resources, but also actually writing code and creating example projects. So I have a couple of things that I'm going to be working on over the next few months. One of the protocols that I'm really interested in is Ceramic Network. And it's kind of like a peer-to-peer database or off-chain storage solution, kind of like where you would put things that don't need to be on-chain and they don't need to be in a file storage system, but they do need to be saved somewhere. So maybe the things that might not be the most important things. So you could think of like if you created a Discord server on Web3, the individual messages, they're pretty important, but if like something from 2 years ago maybe got deleted or we lost it, it probably wouldn't be the end of the world. So those types of storage solutions for messaging and text and stuff like that. So Ceramic Network is really interesting to me. The protocol that I work with on a day-to-day basis, the Graph protocol, is really cool for me because it's kind of like the API layer for blockchain data. And it's really what I've devoted my Web3 kind of career to focus on. So obviously I'm pretty excited about the Graph still. And I think also maybe the last thing I'll be focusing on is understanding how to implement identity and how to implement like authentication and authorization in Web3, because it's a huge core concept and a core thing that developers need to do. So those three things put together will probably be enough for me to focus on this year.
That's for sure. I think that's plenty of work. I think maybe we're going to touch a bit in the next one. So if we zoom out a bit, what would you say that's like a prediction for the blockchain space that has a great impact, that's going to have a great impact? Do you see something coming in particular?
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to see, when people ask, like, what is Web3? Like, what is Web3? There's like a huge answer that you can go into that touches on governance, that touches on ownership, it touches on software infrastructure. So you have all of these different areas starting to play out right now. And I think certain ones will create impactful, meaningful things in the next year faster than others. So I don't think we're going to be able to build out a fully decentralized version of Twitter like this year, because it's or something like that, like this social media platform that has all these features that we're used to, that's really, really fast and kind of does everything we want it to do, because there's so many centralized components that you need to build something like that. But I think what we will see is that people are applying some of these Web3 ideas and kind of building these progressively decentralized applications. So I think we'll see those types of applications built on a progressively decentralized stack. So I do think we'll see something like a social media platform play out over the next year that will have components to Web3. I also think DAOs are going to make a very big impact. And I think that you're going to start seeing more and more teams and projects structure themselves as DAOs as opposed to traditional companies. And I think by the end of the year, we'll have enough experimentation and tooling to kind of make that an easier to approach thing. Because right now we're still kind of at the early phase where we're experimenting. We don't know the legal implications. We don't know the proper ways to do things like tokenization of these communities. But with all the experimentation that we're doing, I think that by the end of the year, you're going to start seeing some really, really large scale DAOs that are formed. And I think that you're going to see some very well-known people that kind of would have in the past built their companies the traditional way, kind of instead flipping them on their head and kind of giving ownership and creating these new incentive mechanisms through DAOs. Obviously, NFTs are going to continue to be a thing. I think that we've just seen, like yesterday, the head of YouTube gaming like leave to go to run a gaming sector within Polygon. I think we're going to see a lot of experimentation with gaming, and I think by the end of the year we'll probably see a couple of like really well-known implementations of Web3 gaming. I don't think they're going to be on the scale of something like Fortnite or to that like experience of something like on a traditional gaming platform like PlayStation or Nintendo. But I do think we'll see some like really cool games that we've probably not really thought of before, like Axie Infinity is an example of something we've seen in the past. I think we're going to see improvements around play to earn and then user ownership for these new types of primitives like ERC-721s, NFTs and stuff within games.
That's for sure. You've introduced it very nicely. My next topic, the DAO. So as you said at the beginning, you're part of the developer DAO, but are there any other DAOs that you're part of or that you admire, or do you see any other DAOs emerging?
Yeah, there's a bunch of DAOs that I'm kind of interested in right now. The first one that I kind of got experience being a part of is Friends with Benefits. And that was kind of like a social DAO. And it was kind of just, you know, I didn't know what it was. And I was like, okay, I'm going to join. And I got in there and I saw all these creative people, you know, meeting each other and doing cool stuff. But I think the ones that are more meaningful to me are going to be things that are kind of like the developer DAO is the one that I created. Our focus is on public goods and developer education and kind of onboarding developers into Web3, helping people for free. So like you don't have to be a member of the DAO to benefit from the work that we're doing. We're creating open source. You can follow our Twitter feed for educational material and stuff like that. There's Seed Club, which is a pretty cool DAO that is, you could think of it as kind of like a Web3 startup incubator, where if someone has an idea for a project, you can kind of like be a part of a Seed Club round and they will help get you funding and stuff like that, and introduce you to like the right people that you might need to kind of build out the thing that you're trying to build. So those are pretty cool. I think ClimateDAO for focusing on climate change and kind of reversing greenhouse effects and carbon offsets and things like that. Those are really interesting to me because they actually go against the narrative of like Web3 and crypto being like environmentally harmful. While there are some protocols out there like Bitcoin and Ethereum as it is today that are kind of you know, environmentally inefficient as opposed to like traditional or other alternative mechanisms, I think seeing these types of DAOs that are actually going out of their way to reverse that and actually create a positive impact are really great, just for not just for the world, but for also bringing people into Web3 so they see that like there are actually a lot of good things that are happening in this space.
Yeah, I think they create kind of a balance between the two, as you said. Still about this, are there any lessons that you've learned while being part of a DAO, or do you have any things that you would do differently if you would start it again?
Yeah, when we created the DAO, we didn't really know what we were doing. And I created it just really within a few hours of coming up with the idea. I wrote the smart contract and deployed it, and didn't really think it through as much as maybe as I could. But I think that the beauty of a lot of these communities is that it's not the result of a single person, it's more of like a community. So I think the cool thing that happened is that the community did all come together and kind of build out what we have today. But what the biggest, I would say, thing I would change for what we did is that we kind of really relied and leaned heavily on what other DAOs had done, and kind of a lot of times used those precedents to kind of drive the direction of what we did. When in reality, we're also new that really no one knows what we're doing. So like following a precedent that isn't the right precedent is pointless anyway. So like, you know, instead of trying to kind of like follow in other people's footsteps, we've decided to kind of blaze our own trails with our own ideas more often now than what we did at the beginning. So like, I think like it's still so early that a lot of these precedents have not been set. So we're trying to figure out ways to do things and do things the right way, regardless of how they've been done in the past. So I think just realizing and understanding that it's all so brand new. When you're creating a DAO, you're going to have so many things that you're going to run into, problems that you have to solve, that sometimes there just isn't an answer that you can find. So you have to kind of figure that answer out on your own.
Definitely. I think, as you said, this territory is extremely new and a lot will follow. Maybe we change a bit the topic. Let's talk a bit about your work at the Graph, which I would say it's extremely powerful protocol, but it's not yet very well known outside the developer world. I think this will change. Can you tell us a bit how it helps index and query historical data on blockchains such as Ethereum, for example?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned the Web3 stack earlier. So if I'm a developer that's been writing code for about 10 years, coming from the traditional Web2, quote unquote, Web2 space. And like when I wanted to build an app, I kind of got to the point where I know that there are certain things that you just need to build an app, and that's a database. You need a server, you need like a client-side framework, you might need some file storage, and then like an authentication layer or whatever. And that kind of gets you 90% of the way there. You can typically build out most things using those primitives. And then you might need to kind of add on, you know, additional things like maybe machine learning or whatever to kind of get you to the finish line. So I think like understanding the perspective that you need this core stack of primitives to kind of build out, what does that look like on Web3? And the Graph kind of fits the API querying layer for Web3. And the reason it exists is that if you kind of want to build out a front end on top of blockchain data, you typically need all types of different queries and selection sets and data retrieval from the blockchain. So if you think of like how we typically query a typical application that's on AWS or that's just a Web2 application, you have these very optimized databases like MySQL database, or maybe Redis, or you might have like a NoSQL database like DynamoDB. But these databases are optimized for both read and write operations. And you can get relational data, you can do full text search, you know, all these different things. But with, you know, blockchain data, it's actually written into these blocks. And over the course of days, weeks, months, and years, you kind of have this data that's very, very hard to read directly. So what most developers used to do was to kind of build out a separate server. And then you go through and you look for every transaction for, say, a smart contract. And whatever data that you want to kind of have available, you just index that data and you read all of the transactions, you kind of save those into a database, and then you build out an API to kind of read that data. What the Graph does is it essentially kind of abstracts that away. It allows developers to describe the data model that they want, the smart contract address that they want to index. They deploy it to this network. The network indexes all that data, creates a GraphQL endpoint, and then developers can just use that endpoint to read the data. And it runs on a network of decentralized nodes, and it kind of provides the decentralized querying layer for this data. And as opposed to having it like in a centralized place where you can't really verify, the network verifies that the data is actually correct. So when you're querying this data from the network, it's almost like querying directly from the blockchain. You get that data verifiability. And that's kind of the whole ethos of Web3. Like you want to know that the data is the right data because you're kind of using this trustless system. But when you're centralizing that data, you now have a single point of failure, and you now have to trust that intermediary.
Yeah, still about this, maybe we talk a bit about the Graph in the light of EIP 4.4s. So we know that one of the presumably scaling mechanisms for Ethereum is the EIP 4.4s that should basically around history pruning to Ethereum clients. However, we know that we need the historical data in order to be accessed, that we check past behavior of users such as votes, accounts, transactions. How does the Graph help access this historical data in the light of EIP 4.4s?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the discussions that Vitalik has around how to kind of access this data, he actually mentions the Graph as a good option for retrieving this type of data, because when you're thinking of the data that's on the chain and how you might actually want to access that data, those are often not the exact same one-to-one mappings, because you might need to do, like you mentioned, historical data, or you might need to kind of get relational data, or you might want to combine data from two smart contracts. So yeah, you can use something like the graph to kind of define which contracts that you want to be made available for querying. And then the network will go ahead and index all that stuff and give you those endpoints so you can query that historical data. And that's kind of one of the main use cases. Actually, you see a lot of the dApps in Web3 using the graph to query historical data.
So definitely, I think this is another reason to go check out the graph. I think.
Yeah, he was actually at the graph meetup in South America. I forgot which country it was. Like I think Argentina, maybe a couple of weeks ago. And I was thinking, man, that would be really cool to have been there.
Definitely. I'm coming to my favorite question, the last one, and this one is, tell me please the name of a person you appreciate from the blockchain space and a project that you think has great potential.
Yeah, totally. So one person that I would say I appreciate a lot is Eva Bailin. She's someone that I work with at the Graph, and I kind of admire her voice and her passion about Web3 and about decentralization and kind of like the ethics and ethos and, you know, uncompromising vision for what the future holds for all of this technology. And, you know, a lot of times I like just following her on Twitter and seeing the things that she talks about, because I kind of get inspired by people like her. And there's a handful of people at the Graph as well. And of course, there's a lot of people outside of the Graph too, but, you know, I kind of hang out with all these people, so I definitely pay extra attention. But yeah, Eva is definitely one of the ones that I recommend anyone here listening to maybe go follow. So she's like EvaBeylin and on Twitter. A project that I'm interested in, I think I mentioned ceramic before. I'll just probably double down on ceramic. I think that one of the core pieces that we need to kind of really get fleshed out is a really great peer-to-peer database off-chain storage solution. And ceramic is doing the best job of building that right now. And we are also building out a future where we're going to be able to index that data on the graph as well. So I think by the end of the year, we're hoping to have that functionality as well. So when you want to create an API for your blockchain data, you can also create an API for the data that you might have stored on ceramic. So I think that ceramic is a core piece of the Web3 stack. And they also have an identity protocol called self.id. And it's cool to check out if you're thinking about how you might build out some type of like self-sovereign identity layer that you don't have to hand roll yourself.
I'll put your recommendations for sure in the comment sections. Thank you so much, Nader. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Bianca. I really enjoyed being here and you know, seeing you again after seeing you in Germany.